James Carter first stepped into Lincoln High in Seattle, it wasn't the size of the school or the noisy crowd of students that struck him. It was the unreal cleanliness. Everything gleamed like it had just been scrubbed spotless. Not just clean, but polished, perfectly controlled. The huge window panes reflected Seattle's gray sky like flawless mirrors. The tiled floors sparkled under the harsh white fluorescent lights, and the hallways stretched out straight and orderly, almost lifeless. It was a far cry from his old school in Atlanta, where walls were plastered with students' graffiti, the faint smell of dried paint hung in the air, and the sounds of beatboxing or freestyle rap echoed from the stairwells at any moment. Lincoln High felt cold, more like a lab than a place for teenagers. His mom called the move here a fresh start, her voice soft but brimming with hope as she unpacked in their small rented apartment near Green Lake. His dad, blunt as ever, called it a necessary change, his eyes stern as he stared at James across the dinner table the night before. James didn't know what to call it yet. He just felt something heavy settle on his shoulders as he pushed open the school's thick glass doors and stepped inside. Right away, he noticed the looks, not the obvious stares anyone could spot, but quick glances, hushed whispers behind his back, a few kids sizing him up from his worn sneakers to his plain gray hoodie before turning away. It all said one thing without words. Who's this guy? At 16, James wasn't small by any stretch. At 5'10", he had lean, solid muscle. Not the showy kind gym rats flexed, but the kind earned from years of training, tight, controlled, no excess. He moved with a quiet confidence his dad had drilled into him since he was a kid. Steady steps, back straight as a mast, never slouched or stumbling. His dad, a former soldier, always said, "You don't need to shout to be heard. How you stand says enough." But to the kids at Lincoln High, he was clearly an outsider. A black guy from the deep south, out of place in this shiny, curated world. James made it to the main office without a hitch, grabbing his schedule from a receptionist whose smile was so polite it felt fake. As he stepped out, a group near the lockers caught his eye. A tall, broad-shouldered guy with perfectly styled blonde hair, like he'd just walked out of a barber shop, was leaning against a locker, his two buddies cracking up at something he'd said. Their laughter wasn't loud, but it carried down the hall. Deliberate. The kind meant to let the target know they were the joke. James wasn't the target yet, but he felt the slow sizing up, like they were weighing him in their heads. The blonde guy, Ethan Brooks, from the class roster James had skimmed that morning, looked at him with eyes that weren't exactly hostile, but sure as hell weren't friendly. It was the look of someone assessing, "Are you worth messing with?" Ethan smirked, leaned over to whisper something to his crew, and they snickered, glancing at James longer than necessary. James let out a soft breath through his nose, walking past without stopping. He didn't need to prove anything. His dad's words rang in his head like they had 100 times before. Strength isn't for showing off, it's knowing when to walk away. So he walked, his sneakers squeaking faintly on the glossy floor, but for guys like Ethan, being ignored was something they couldn't stand. And James didn't know it yet, but this first encounter was just the opening act of a longer drama. Within a week at Lincoln High, James had the place figured out. The school had an unspoken order, a hierarchy no one had to explain. The jocks, especially the football team, ruled everything like uncrowned kings. The rich kids, with their shiny cars parked out front and designer clothes, acted like royalty, strutting around with heads held high and sneering looks. Everyone else, the regular students, just tried to survive without drawing attention, quietly bowing their heads in the halls or sticking to the cafeteria corners. James fell somewhere in between, not loud, not picking fights, but not timid or scared either, and that alone made him stand out. Ethan Brooks was the type who liked easy prey, the shy kids who forced awkward laughs when humiliated, who didn't know how to push back or just took it with their heads down. Those were his favorites. James wasn't that type, and Ethan seemed to clock it from the start. It began subtly, like a game Ethan wanted to test. A accidental shoulder bump in a crowded hall. A muttered, "Watch where you're going, dude," just loud enough for James to hear. Or a notebook knocked off his desk in history class, clattering to the floor with a dry thud. Ethan always flashed a smug grin after, his bright blue eyes glinting like he was waiting for James to snap, to react, to give him an excuse to escalate. But James didn't give him that. He just picked up the notebook, set it back on the desk, and kept writing, face unchanged. Then came the comments, sharper, more personal. One day, as James passed the lockers, Ethan leaned there, arms crossed, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Didn't know this school took slum kids, Carter. You lost or something?" His crew, Jake and Tyler, cackled, eyeing James like they were watching a comedy show. Another time, in gym class, Ethan lobbed a basketball at him, yelling, "You gonna try out for football? I hear you guys are good at that, right?" And the worst was, one morning when James sat alone in the library corner, and Ethan strolled by, pausing just long enough to whisper, "Why so quiet, Carter? I thought you people were supposed to be funny. Got nothing to say?" The worst part? Ethan never said it outright in front of teachers. He kept his voice low enough to brush off as a joke, slick enough to play dumb if caught. His buddies laughed along, not all of them, but enough to make James feel heat rising in his hands. Fingers curling into fists under the desk. He thought about telling his dad, but he could guess the response. "Handle it with discipline, James. Don't stoop to their level." His mom would worry, her eyes widening, voice trembling as she told him to tell a teacher. But James knew that was pointless. Lincoln High wouldn't touch a football star like Ethan over stuff no one could prove. So he kept ignoring it, staying silent like a steel wall, until one moment changed everything. It was Friday lunch, a typical dreary Seattle day with rain streaking down the cafeteria windows and damp air clinging to the wooden tables. James had just sat down with his tray, chicken sandwich, an apple, and a milk carton, trying to stay calm amid the chatter around him. He just wanted to eat fast, get out, and avoid trouble. But then a shadow loomed over his table, tall and menacing. Ethan stood there, hands in his pockets, flanked by Jake and Tyler, his inseparable trio. Ethan laughed, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Hey, Carter, why so quiet? Cat got your tongue? Or you just don't talk?" James didn't answer. He took a bite of his sandwich, chewing slowly, eyes on his tray like Ethan didn't exist. But Ethan wasn't satisfied with silence. He snatched the apple off James's tray, rolling it in his hand like he was weighing it, then chucked it hard across the cafeteria. It sailed through the air, landing near the drink station with a dull thump, rolling across the floor between a few pairs of shoes. Heads turned. A few giggles broke Ambosat, and the air got tense. Everyone was waiting to see what happened next. James set his fork down, slow and careful, the metal clinking softly against the tray in the quieting space. He looked up, locking eyes with Ethan for the first time that week, his dark brown gaze calm but icy. Ethan grinned wide, thinking James's silence meant fear. That was his biggest mistake. He stepped forward, shoving James's shoulder hard enough to tip his chair, voice booming with provocation. "Come on, Carter, do something! Scared already! Get up, you coward!" James took a deep breath, muscles tensing under his hoodie but still perfectly controlled. This time, he didn't walk away. The cafeteria went dead silent. Conversations stopped. Plastic trays quit scraping like someone hit pause. Even the lunch ladies, spoons in hand, froze, watching from behind the glass counter. Ethan Brooks had just shoved James Carter in front of 100 kids, and everyone was waiting to see what he'd do. James sat still for a beat, mind racing like a machine. His dad's words rang clear as a bell. "Don't fight out of anger, James. Fight with control." He slid his chair back slowly, standing up. No rush, no panic. His movements were precise, smooth, like an athlete warming up for a game. Ethan laughed louder, glancing at Jake and Tyler with triumph. "Oh, we've got a tough guy. You gonna hit me, Carter? Gonna play ghetto gangster?" "Do it." James's face didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, studying Ethan like a tough math problem, eyes scanning every smug line on his face. And that's when Ethan sensed something off. James wasn't shaking. He wasn't backing down. He didn't even blink. Ethan's grin faltered, a flicker of hesitation as he shifted his feet, instinct warning he'd gone too far. But it was too late. Ethan lunged, shoving again, hands swinging hard like he meant to pin James down. James moved lightning fast. Before Ethan's arms fully extended, James's left hand shot up, clamping his wrist like a vice. His right hand snapped forward, locking Ethan's elbow with just enough force. Then, with a fluid twist of his body, James used Ethan's own momentum to flip him. Ethan's feet left the floor, his back slamming into the cafeteria tiles with a loud boom. Nearby trays rattling. He sprawled out, gasping, eyes wide with shock and panic. Silence hit, sharp as a blade slicing the air. Jake and Tyler stepped forward, but James didn't bother looking. He crouched beside Ethan, voice low and even, no emotion. "Don't mess with me again, got it? No threats, no insults, just a cold statement." And that calm made it worse for Ethan. He wasn't just taken down. He was dismissed in front of the whole school. James stood, brushing his hands like he'd moved a chair, not a person. He grabbed his tray and walked off through stunned stares, not looking back. The cafeteria stayed quiet, his footsteps echoing steadily on the floor. Then, from a far corner, a whisper, "Holy crap, what just happened?" That was enough. Murmurs erupted like a dam breaking, swelling into excited chatter. Someone had filmed it all, fingers already flying to share the video. Someone texted the story, messages zipping through group chats like wildfire, and Ethan, sitting there, jaw clenched, fists white-knuckled, eyes red as he watched James disappear. He knew by the final bell Lincoln High would be talking about nothing else. By day's end, the story had spread school-wide like wildfire on Capitol Hill. James Carter took down Ethan Brooks in the cafeteria, not with a wild punch, not in a messy brawl, but with a clean, effortless move, almost perfect. That's what made it unforgettable. If James had fought dirty, with blood or yelling, it'd be different. Just another school fight, fading in weeks. But this was something else, something sharper. James made Ethan look weak, helpless. And at a place like Lincoln High, where reputation was everything, that was something no one forgave or forgot. James left school when the final bell rang, passing through the main gate, ignoring the eyes locked on him. Some kids looked at him like they were seeing him for the first time, wide-eyed with awe. Others whispered as he turned away, voices low like they feared he'd hear. A freshman even stepped back as he passed, like James was a beast fresh out of a cage. Ethan didn't wait at the gate. Too obvious, too dumb. But James wasn't fooled. He knew how guys like Ethan worked. He wouldn't let a humiliation like that slide. He'd wait, plan, strike back to reclaim his shattered rep from the cafeteria floor. That night, as James lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Think you're hot stuff, Carter? You got lucky today. Watch your back. I'm not kidding." James stared at the glowing white words in the dark. He exhaled, locked the screen, and set it face down on the nightstand with a small click in the quiet room. No surprise, no shock. But now he had a choice. Ignore it, pretend nothing happened, or make Ethan and the school see who he really was. Whatever he picked, Monday was when it'd all blow up. Monday, the vibe at Lincoln High was different. Side glances from kids in the halls, conversations cutting off as James walked by. It all confirmed what he'd guessed. The story had legs now, racing through the school like a mini-storm. At the lockers, 2 underclassmen scurried out of his way, eyes darting like they feared he'd snap. A tall senior in a basketball jersey nodded approval as he passed, muttering, "Cool move, bro." Then the wannabe friends swarmed, buzzing around him like flies. "Yo, Carter, you really dropped Brooks flat? I heard you barely touched him and he went down like a sack. You're all quiet but got hands, that's dope. Where'd you learn to fight?" James brushed them off, giving a quick glance or short nod, not bothering to speak. This wasn't respect. It was entertainment. They didn't see him as a person, just a living rumor, a story to retell at break. He slammed his locker shut with a bang and walked off. Then he spotted Ethan, posted up at his usual spot near the main gate where he'd flex his power with his crew. But this time it was off. The cocky grin was gone, the easy swagger too. He stood stiff, hands clenched at his sides, blue eyes now cloudy and tense. Jake and Tyler were still there, but they weren't laughing anymore, just hovering like faded shadows. Ethan caught James's gaze for half a second, then looked away, jaw tight. James almost smirked, but he knew Ethan wasn't done. He was just holding it in, waiting. Lunch was worse than he'd expected. The cafeteria air felt heavy, thick like Seattle's morning fog. People stared as he walked in, some whispering, some pointing like they were waiting for Act 2. They thought Ethan would leap over tables to reclaim his honor, or at least stage a big showdown. But Ethan wasn't there. His table sat empty, chairs cold. James sat down, biting into his sandwich, when a girl slid into the seat across from him. Mia Harper. He'd never talked to her, but he knew her, smart, confident, not one to chase the crowd, always dodging school drama. Mia set her water down, studied him for a sec, then said, "You didn't just beat Brooks, Carter. You humiliated him in front of everyone." James took another bite, chewed, swallowed, then met her eyes. "He brought it on himself." Mia smirked, a half smile. "Yeah, but you finished it. To him, that's worse than a broken nose." James didn't reply, just watched her, waiting to see what she wanted. Mia leaned in, voice lower. "Watch out. Brooks's dad's on the school board. You think he'll let his golden boy get embarrassed and do nothing?" James looked straight at her, calm. "Do I look worried?" Mia sighed, shook her head. "You should be, Carter. This isn't a game." She stood, grabbed her tray, and left with one last line. "Cover your back. I mean it." For the first time since Friday, James felt something new stir inside. Not anger, not annoyance, but curiosity. Because what was coming wouldn't just be a fight anymore. It'd be something bigger, deeper, and he knew he had to be ready. By Wednesday, the air at Lincoln High shifted again, like Seattle's sky after rain. Clear but still uneasy. Ethan wasn't just avoiding James. He was erasing him. No comments, no sneers, no games. He walked the halls with his head down, dodging James's gaze like he was a ghost. To some, that was it. James had won, right? He'd knocked out the football star in the cafeteria, and now Ethan was tucking tail like a whipped dog, but James didn't buy it. He felt a vague unease, like the whistle of wind before a storm. It sharpened when Mia tracked him down after last period, pulling him to a quiet stairwell corner. Mia didn't beat around the bush. "Brooks's dad is trying to get you expelled." James barely reacted, just stood there, hands in his pockets. "For what?" Mia snorted, voice thick with sarcasm. "They don't need a reason, Carter. He's saying you attacked Brooks, unprovoked. He's pulling strings with the school board to make it stick." James wasn't shocked. He'd seen this play out in Atlanta. A white kid starts it, a black kid ends it, then suddenly the rules flip and the one who ends it takes the fall. He rubbed his face, breathing slow. "So what do I do?" Mia hesitated, her eyes flashing with resolve. "Fight back. Not with fists. With proof. Got any videos, texts, anything?" James nodded slightly, gears turning. That night he sat in his room, laptop screencasting blue light on his face. He pulled up everything, screenshots of the threatening text from the unknown number, the cafeteria fight video, full clip, not just the takedown, but Ethan's provocation too, and a list of witnesses willing to back him, kids who'd seen it all from start to finish. By morning he was set. When he walked into school, he wasn't alone. Mia was with him plus two others. Lucas, a scrawny freshman, and Sarah, a senior girl. People he barely knew, but who knew the truth and were ready to speak. They marched straight to the principal's office, steps firm like a small army. The meeting dragged over an hour, tense as a taut string about to snap. Ethan's dad, a big man in an expensive gray suit, sat across, voice low but cutting. "He attacked my son for no reason. This is unacceptable violence." But James had evidence, clear video, undeniable texts, and Lucas and Sarah's statements. The principal, a middle-aged woman with thick glasses, reviewed it all, lips pressed tight. When it ended, Ethan's dad didn't get his way. James wasn't expelled, wasn't suspended, nothing stuck, because the truth didn't just side with him. It was ironclad. Ethan didn't show up to school for a week after. When he came back, he was different, quieter, less cocky. He moved through the halls with his head low, voice softer, no longer the arrogant king of Lincoln High. He wasn't scared of James, but he knew James hadn't just won a fight. He'd won where it mattered most, where reputation and truth collided. And that's what people remembered. James never asked for respect or attention. He just wanted to live without being tested, provoked, forced to prove himself over and over. But the reality is, some people only learn through consequences. When you finally show them what you can do, they never forget. Sometimes standing tall isn't about throwing a punch. It's about letting the truth drown out the lies. If this story hit you, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments. Ever had to prove yourself when you shouldn't have had to?